Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Srimad Bhagavatam, also with AC, Bhakti Swami Prabhupada ki jai, Namachar Hari Das Thakur ki jai. Prayams to Ho, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Seed of Bhakti Gadadhar, Shivasadi Gaur Bhakti Vrinda ki jai, Sri Sri Radha Krishna, Gopi Gopi Rashama Kunda Radha Kunda, Giri Govardhan ki jai, Sri Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Navadip Dham ki jai, Gang Jamuna Tulsi Bhakti Devi ki jai, Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Sambhavetta Bhakti Vrinda ki jai, Go Premanandi, all glories to some of the bodies, all glories to some of the bodies, all glories to some of the bodies, all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga, glories to Shri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prachadane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastatradesha Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 18, verse 34. Brahmana Kshatra Bandhuhi Griha Pala Narupata Sakatam Tadgrihe Dvasta Sabandam Abhoktam Arhati. Brahmanai, by the Brahminical order, Kshatra Bandhu, sons of the Kshatriyas, he, certainly, Grihapala, a watchdog, Nirupta, designated, Sa, he, Katam, on what grounds, Tadgrihe, in the home of him, Devasta, keeping at the door, Sabandam, in the same pot, Abhoktam, to eat, Arhati, deserves. Translation: the descendants of the kingly orders are definitely designated as watchdogs, and they must keep themselves at the door. On what grounds can dogs enter the house and claim to dine with the master on the same plate? Purport: the inexperienced Brahmana boy certainly knew that the king asked for water from his father, and the father did not respond. He tried to explain away his father's inhospitality in an impertinent manner befitting an uncultured boy. He was not at all sorry for the king's not being well received. On the contrary, he justified the wrong act in a way characteristic of the Brahmanas of Kali Yuga. He compared the king to a watchdog, and so it was wrong for the king to enter the home of a Brahmana and ask for water from the same pot. The dog is certainly reared by its master, but that does not mean that the dog shall claim to dine and drink from the same pot. This mentality of false prestige is the cause of downfall of the perfect social order. And we can see that in the beginning it was started by the inexperienced son of a Brahmana. As the dog is never allowed to enter within the room and hearth, although it is reared by the master, similarly, according to Shringi, the king had no right to enter the house of Samika Rishi. According to the boy's opinion, the king was on the wrong side and not his father, and thus he justified his silent father. Translation: the descendants of the kingly orders are definitely designated as watchdogs, and they must keep themselves at the door. On what grounds can dogs enter the house and claim to dine with the master on the same plate? So this is very insulting to the king. At the same time, it's in one sense got some truth in it from another point of view, that is the Brahman's point of view. As we know, the kings are protectors. Kshatriya means one who protects. So they're supposed to protect. And therefore they are the servants of everyone in one sense, because they have to protect the whole kingdom. However, to call them watchdogs is a little bit insulting. Because obviously in ancient times, dogs did not have a very good reputation. When they mention the word dog or kukura, it is given a very low status, unlike in the modern world, where it's a man's best friend in the modern world, but in ancient times it was like something very contaminating, something very low. So if you call anybody a dog, then it's a very big insult. So then, as it's explained by Prabhupada, the dog isn't allowed to get in the house. You don't let him enter the house. That's impurity. So he has to stay outside, and he does the service by barking outside, not allowing strangers to come in. And you feed him a little bit of food outside. You never allow him to come in. So that's the status of a dog. Of course, extending that into Kali Yuga, we can say that this is how the Brahmanas began to regard the other Varnas. And of course, even if when the British came, of course they were very critical of the whole system, but of course one can criticize the British society also, but they were curiously looking at the Hindus, and their customs and things like that, and other foreigners as well. So they remarked how the Brahmana was given such a high status, and this a few hundred years ago. Even a few hundred years ago, if a Brahmana walked down the street in a village, everybody had to hide. They couldn't show their faces. They weren't allowed to show their faces. They felt very small and humble, just like the dogs would be hiding away in the corner. So that when the Brahmana walked down the street, everybody disappeared out of respect for the Brahmana. That was just a few hundred years ago. So the Brahmanas were given great respect, and we can say that some of them probably fed off that type of respect and exploited the situation for their own good. And consequently, with the rise of democracy in India, etc., then it went the other way around, and they began to persecute the Brahmanas as being, too clever, and they got all the high positions, etc. So they started taking away all their positions and discouraging them from getting educated, etc., in favor of the lower classes. So it's a two-way perspective. The lower classes began to become hostile to the Brahmanas, and the Brahmanas were naturally, we could say, because they were very intelligent, many of them, they got high positions under the British. So they had very high positions, and everyone began to get envious of them, and they began to attack them. And it's still there in modern society also. You'll see it quite often. The hostility is there still. Anyway, Prabhupada traces this whole, hostility back to this time here. This is an indication of the hostility created because the Brahmanas began to insult the other classes. And here Shringi is insulting the Kshatriya, not just any Kshatriya, but the king, and not only any king, but Parikshit Maharaj, who was a very, very great devotee of the Lord and an ideal king. And he even calls them a Kshatriya Bandhu in this verse, which means a friend of a Kshatriya. So that's a polite way of saying you're not even a Kshatriya, even though if you're born in a Kshatriya family. And we also speak of the Brahma Bandhu. He's born in a Brahmana family, but he's not qualified as a Brahmana, so he's considered to be outcast more or less. Huh? So here Shringi is calling Parikshit just not a qualified Kshatriya at all. Huh? And of course the reason is this immediate event where Parikshit disrespected Samika Rishi, Shringi's father, and then put a snake around his neck and then left the place because he didn't get any water. So that's the incident. So we can argue on both sides. If Parikshit was wrong, he shouldn't have created such an offense against the Brahmana because of his thirst and hunger. And we can also criticize Shringi here for taking such a harsh attitude towards the king and not understanding his position and then insulting him in this way and finally cursing him. So this is the sign of the contamination within the Brahminical community. The contamination is always there. No guna is perfect. So if we have sattva guna and we have brahmanas, they're not pure sattva. They will manifest tama or raja sometimes. But prominently they're sattvic, so they're put in a class like that. And kshatriyas are mode of passion, mode of goodness, etc. And sudras are mode of ignorance, but sometimes the sudras also show rajas or sattva also. So no guna is pure in this world, and no varna is pure. So it's just a matter of amount of quality that determines the different varnas. So the brahmanas are prominently sattvic by nature. In spite of that, even in Satya Yuga, some brahmanas may get angry or curse each other or whatever. That happens also. But less likely, less common than with the lower classes. But still, we'll find that fault is also there even in brahmanas sometimes. But as we get towards Kali Yuga, the tamas begins to increase in all the varnas, so that the kshatriyas and the brahmanas and the vaishyas also become more tamasic. This is what happens in Kali Yuga. Again, we cannot say that everybody in Kali Yuga is completely tamas. They'll also show some sattva. And even in Kali Yuga, compared to the other varnas, the brahmanas, if they're raised properly, they'll show more sattva. So there is still some distinction of varna and qualities, but tamas becomes more prominent. So therefore we'll find more faults in all the classes, and we'll find brahmanas also getting more faults in Kali Yuga. They may not be exactly on the same level as the other varnas in Kali Yuga, but nevertheless they also show a lot of faults. So this is the nature of Kali Yuga. It begins, things begin to get more polluted. So though Shringi was, in one sense, born in a good family with a qualified Brahmana father, and he was properly educated, etc., that he showed this bad quality of insulting and condemning the king, who was a great devotee of the Lord. And consequently, he gets a bad reputation for that. So, of course, these are varna etiquette, customary forms of respect that have to be adhered to and important in the varnashram system. But for us, more important is the Vaishnava. So that's even more critical. So to criticize the Vaishnava is worse than criticizing the Brahmana. So this is a problem with Shringi. He is not only criticizing the king for his bad act, he's also criticizing the great devotee. Now we can also say, well, he had made some fault, etc., like that. So our acharyas say that yes, devotees make faults, especially the devotees in the material world. They are not completely pure. They are going through the processes of anartha, nishta, ruchi, asakti, bhava, and then they get to prema. So prema is 100% pure. Bhava is maybe 98, 99% pure. But that 1% of purity can cause fault, even in someone on the bhava stage who is able to see Krishna. He can have fault also. What to speak of everyone below that, nishta, ruchi, asakti, they will show fault. They have anarthas. They're not a prema. Huh? So, nevertheless, we're told to respect the devotees, the Vaishnava. And to unnecessarily see those faults, that becomes the Vaishnava Ninda, the first Namaparad, to criticize the Vaishnava. So this is worse than the Varna, breaking the Varna rules. That's a Varnashrama, Dharma. It's a sin in the sense of Dharma. Right? But when we start criticizing the devotee of the Lord, this is aparad, which is, we could say, similar because it's criticism. You criticize a Brahmana, criticize a Vaishnava. And both are sinful. But the problem with the aparad is not only you get bad karma, like suffering and material suffering for the body, but you get devotional harm. So we can say it's devotional violence. The criticism of the normal person in the material world according to Dharma, that is violence on the material level, and you get a material result, suffering in the material world. When you criticize the Vaishnava, then you get a devotional effect. You can get the suffering, of course, like the bodily suffering, but then you get the other effect, devotional suffering, which means that you lose your bhakti. You tend to lose your bhakti. And the more you indulge in that sort of thing, the more the bhakti decreases and decreases. So that's the problem with that's why aparads are considered more serious for the devotee. Because by that criticism, the devotion becomes less and less and less. If we commit a sinful activity, fine, then we get the karma for that, of course. But the devotee is not so much concerned about that. He understands that the material body is a place of suffering anyway. But more serious is the decrease of devotion. So that is very serious. And if the aparad becomes very serious, then bhakti can disappear also. And then you don't want to do bhakti anymore. No interest in it. No taste for it at all. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we see there when Lord Chaitanya is describing the planting the seed of bhakti, Guru and Krishna, by their mercy we get the seed of bhakti. We get an inclination to do bhakti. We have faith, and then we start the process of bhakti, and there's a little bit of activity we do for Krishna. And then we have to cultivate that. So the seed has to grow into a plant. And we know that in gardening, things just don't grow by themselves. You have to cultivate, so we have a whole bunch of backpackers down there cultivating the fields and making sure that they're watered properly and the weeds are coming out and the bugs don't attack them, etc. If it's a weed, fine, we don't have to take care of it. If it's bhakti, it's something very rare. It's like a rare plant, and it's very, very difficult to, cultivate it nicely. So you have to take care of it very nicely and help it grow up. It's like a rare flower. Some rare flower, you have to really take care of it, whatever, and make sure the temperature is proper, give it the proper sunlight, and then it grows and it flowers nicely. So bhakti is like that. It has to be cultivated very, very carefully, and if we're not careful, it won't grow, or it may even die. So the devotee is considered to be the gardener, which means he's responsible for that plant. So we can't say Guru is responsible or this person is responsible that my bhakti grows. We have to do the activity. We're the devotee, we're the gardener. We have to grow our bhakti. We have to nourish our bhakti, which means we have to have proper spiritual intelligence and association to help it grow very, very nicely. And if it's not growing nicely, there's something wrong. So we're responsible, and of course then we have weeds growing up. We have to pull the weeds out. So there's weeds in devotional service like desire for position and worship and greed and sinful activity. These are called weeds, and we have to pull these things out, stop these activities, and then the plant will grow nicely. But then Lord Chaitanya says the big problem is the mad elephant. The mad elephant comes in and steps on the plant, and then it's finished. It can't grow anymore. And that's a common, not here, but in India. It's still common some places in South India and in North India, West India, I guess, East India, above Bengal, where we do have wild elephants. And they're in the mountains, and they're doing their thing up in the mountains and the jungles like that. Sometimes they run into the village and they start tearing everything apart. And you can't stop them. They just irrationally will do this, and it's very difficult to do anything. You know? So that's like and then when they do that, they pull up everything, step on everything. Step on all the banana trees, take all the bananas, finished. So that's like the mad elephant coming into your garden of bhakti. That's the Vaishnava aparad, and boop, boop, finished. No more bhakti. Little plant is growing like this. Elephant steps on it. It's finished. So that's what can happen to bhakti through Vaishnava aparad. Of course, there's degrees. There's the accidental one, that's not so bad, and then there's intentional one, and there's serious intentional one. And according to the degree of the aparad, then the more the bhakti decreases, or ultimately gets completely eradicated. So as the bhakti decreases and even eradicated, then the taste for performing bhakti decreases and decreases and decreases. We have no more interest in doing bhakti. So our enthusiasm, when it becomes less and less and less, and this is a sign something wrong's happening. We're getting weaker and weaker. So it's like the plant dying gradually because of the aparad, the offense. So Lord Chaitanya says that this Vaishnava aparad is the mad elephant offense. That's the one that really affects everything. And the reason is, of course, that the other offenses, we chant them every morning. Like, consider the Devatas and Krishna to be equal and their names to be equal, or to consider the Hare Krishna to be one of the pious activities, like a material activity in the Vedas, etc. So those are more or less not so, devotees aren't going to become too much into that and make those mistakes or whatever. That's for ignorant people. So we have enough knowledge to avoid those. But this one is a very, very serious offense. And it's put at the first, and it's also called the mad elephant offense. So we offend the Vaishnava, then it seriously affects it. Right? So even if it is accidental, it will decrease the bhakti a little bit. In other words, that's the story of how Rupa Goswami laughed because he was seeing the pastimes of Radha and Krishna, and he was laughing in his little house. And some sadhu was walking by, and he heard the laugh, and then he thought, he's laughing at me. Rupa Goswami's laughing at me because he had a limp on his leg and he couldn't walk properly. So then that sage got a little bit upset with Rupa Goswami. Why is he laughing at me like this? And then he went away. He didn't say anything to Rupa Goswami. Rupa Goswami didn't even know it. He was in his house and he was laughing like this because of Krishna's pastimes with Radha. Later on, Rupa Goswami felt his bhakti decrease, and he said, how is that possible? How is it possible that my bhakti can decrease? So he went to Sanatana Goswami. And Sanatana Goswami said, well, the only thing that can decrease your bhakti is Vaishnava aparad, offending the Vaishnava. But then Rupa Goswami, well, I sit in my cottage, my kutir all the time, and I'm chanting Hare Krishna and meditating and seeing the pastimes of Krishna, writing scriptures. I don't even see anybody. How can I commit offense against anybody? But then Sanatana Goswami, there's no possibility of anything else. How can the bhakti decrease otherwise? So you must have done something. So Rupa Goswami didn't know what to do because he didn't know who he'd committed offense against. Must have done something he didn't know. So then he began to think what to do. I'm not in this good position now because bhakti is decreasing and decreasing. What to do? So then he thought, he had a little plan, and he decided to have a festival, which means feast, feed all the Vaishnavas. So somehow or other he got the funds together, and he announced to all the people of Vrindavan, okay, we're going to have a nice feast in honor of so-and-so, whatever like that. So then everybody came, and then he looked and saw who was not there. And the person who was not there, that was the person he must have offended. So he looked around very carefully. There was one person there, and I wasn't there. And then he said, oh, it's this person here, that's the one. And then he found that person out, and he explained, how did I offend you? And he explained everything like that. And then he apologized and said, well, it wasn't my fault really, but I apologize if I upset you in any way, like that. So because that sadhu was upset with Rupa, that caused the bhakti of Rupa to decrease. So it was unintentional, but nevertheless it had effect on that high level. So on lower levels, of course, it's going to affect more. That's unintentional. If it's intentional, then of course, then it's going to be very serious effects. In the Nectar of Devotion there, when Rupa Goswami talks about bhava stage, then he says that you can go to bhava stage and you can experience the bliss of Krishna because you realize Krishna and you could see him and begin to participate in his pastimes a little bit in bhava stage. But sometimes the bhakti decreases. So even in bhava stage, this can happen. You can decrease your bhakti. And he says it's because of the aparad. Somehow there's aparad there. And the example is given of Bharat. So Bharat had attained the state of bhava, and he was able to see Vishnu in the forest. When he was meditating, then he would see Vishnu, and he would have ecstatic symptoms, and he would cry, and his body would shiver, etc. So he actually saw Vishnu. But then later, he became attracted to that small deer, and he forgot to worship Vishnu completely, even though he had seen Vishnu with his eyes. He forgot about him. And he got absorbed in this little deer. How is it possible? It's like in modern day, somebody's attained a very high state, and somehow he gets attached to his dog, and then he's just thinking of his dog all the time, and he gives up worshiping Krishna. He's worshiping his dog. So this is what happened to Bharat. How could he do such a thing? He was so attracted to the deer that he forgot about Vishnu, who he'd actually seen directly. So, the explanation is given that in some previous lifetime he committed some aparad. And the effect of that aparad began to sprout in the bhava stage. So, no, there's no sinful reactions or anything in bhava stage, but the effect of the aparad began to disturb his bhakti in that state. So even in bhava stage it could have some effect like that. So that's one case. Of course, Rupa Goswami also says, in any case, do not criticize the person on bhava stage, even if you see faults. Because there's faults on the moon also. If you look at the moon, you'll see spots on the moon, and we can criticize, the moon's not so beautiful after all. Look at all the spots on it. But the person who's attained bhava has attained a very rare position, so it's not our right to criticize him. And at the same time, Krishna himself takes care of that person. So in the case of Bharat, after he became a deer for one birth, next lifetime he became Jad Bharat, and he got prema. He was not a normal deer anymore. It's not normal karma. It was an arrangement of the Lord. And by that he was able to advance. The Lord took care of him. In spite of his, we could say his aparad or whatever, and the fault and his loss of worship of Vishnu, again he regained his status and continued. So anyway, that was the effect of aparad. Sinful reactions, karmas, get destroyed quicker than the aparad effects get destroyed. Sinful activities will give their effect, and then gradually, as we go through nishta, ruchi, asakti, that by the end of asakti, karma's all gone. No more karma. But even in bhava stage, the effect of aparad continues. It will affect you. So it sticks to the jiva more than the karma's aparad, and will cause more serious effects to our bhakti. So that's the nature of the Vaishnava aparad. So therefore we have to be careful in all cases of that, the aparad. Thus, here, Shringi was, okay, this is a bad kshatriya. He's a fallen kshatriya, more like a dog than anything else. And he's coming in and eating off the same plate. He's claiming privilege on the same level as my father. So he insults them in that way. Just like a dog that jumps on the table and starts eating your food when you're not looking. So that's a very harsh criticism he's giving of Parikshit Maharaj. So it's not just a criticism of the kshatriya, and the faulty kshatriya, it's also a criticism ultimately of the devotee. So that's even worse, criticizing the devotee of the Lord. Therefore, that will cause, you say, more suffering, because not only we suffer in terms of karma, but we also get less chance of bhakti, or bhakti gets destroyed, or bhakti gets weakened, etc. So for the Vaishnava, that's even more important for us to be careful of. That is the offending the Vaishnava. Therefore, this event has a twofold problem in it. One is the caste problem, and the other is the interaction with a Vaishnava. So Shringi was aware of caste, and he was also proud of his caste as a Brahmana, and this gave rise to this cursing of Parikshit Maharaj, being extra harsh on the king. But then the other problem is he was also a devotee. So that's the even worse result for that we offend the devotees in such a way. So we have to be careful. So thus the aparads, that's why we chant the aparads every morning. The nam-aparads are considered to be very serious. They're nam-aparads because they involve the name. So the Vaishnava Ninda is because we're criticizing this Vaishnava aparad, of course, but because the Vaishnavas in our sampradaya are spreading the holy name. Therefore, it's nam-aparad because we're criticizing a person who's spreading the glories of Krishna's name. So in that sense, it's nam-aparad also. So it's nam-aparad is also the Vaishnava aparad. So the two are very, very serious. So we have to avoid it in all cases. We can say, of course, why is it so serious? And the reason it is serious is because it is the devotee who is the cause of faith, and faith is the qualification for bhakti. And after you get faith, then you approach a devotee to get knowledge so you can practice bhakti. So bhakti is caused by devotees, ultimately. Mercy of accidental mercy, and then you get faith eventually in one lifetime. And then after that, you go to devotees and you get some information and you begin the process of bhakti. And as you're doing bhakti, you need that sadhu sangha. So devotees are the cause of bhakti, and after we start bhakti, they are the cause of our advancement. So therefore, we offend the devotees, very, very difficult to advance. The offense means hostility. If we're hostile towards the cause of bhakti, then how can we advance in bhakti? The cause will disappear. There's no cause for the bhakti continue when the cause has disappeared. So, in other words, the offense against the devotee cuts us off from devotee's mercy. Of course, we can always say, well, I'll offend this devotee, but I'll be friendly with this devotee. And then we make choices like this. But Krishna doesn't actually see like that. So once we start offending some devotees in one category, we say these are good ones, these are bad ones, like this, that Krishna has cut off the mercy completely, and you can't get any mercy anywhere. Yeah. So we have to be very, very careful how we conduct ourselves in relation to devotees. So the opposite of that, of course, is mentioned in Nectar of Instruction. We interact with the devotees. We have sadhu sangha. How do we interact? And then he gives those 6 things. Giving knowledge, receiving knowledge. Giving food, receiving food. Giving gifts, receiving gifts, like this. So there's an interchange between devotees in a very friendly way. And if we maintain that, then we can advance very nicely in devotional service. Okay, any question?
Hare Krishna, thank you, Maharaj. That's very informative. In Rupa Goswami's case, of course, the crippled person, he actually could find out who he offended.
Yeah, if you can't, what do you do?
In our case, especially these days, there's more sensitivity in people's minds.
Yeah.
And you can just sort of look at somebody and you're just thinking about something else and they can take offense. And so we're not so much in that situation that we can, ask every person, probably, you offend so many people and you don't mean to. So how do you counteract that?
So I've said that the unintentional offense is not so serious as the intentional one, where we actually have hostility towards a particular person and then we express it either mentally or physically or verbally or whatever. So that's where it gets serious. So the other one has a little effect, but not so much. In the case of Rupa Goswami, it wasn't so much, but he could detect because he was on a high level, he could detect that something was going a little bit off, But not so serious, but and it's difficult to detect also, but what to do in that case? So one, of course, is be careful as possible that we act properly at all times. So don't want to mistreat anybody. And the other is that if we feel there has been some offense but we don't know what it is, all we can do is very seriously chant the holy name. So that's the final solution. If we don't know what to do, we seriously take the shelter of the holy name and chant that, and by that process then eventually the effect of that offense goes away.
Well, if I understood right what you said, it seems like in a higher level, when the bhakti decreases, the devotee is wondering how can I get the bhakti back. But in a lower level, it seems like when the bhakti decreases, it must be your fault. Is that correct?
Well, on the lower level, generally, as a result of the aparad, it decreases. So it's not at a very high level anyway for ordinary devotees, so it starts decreasing and it's not much bhakti at all. So therefore we can say that also anarthas can more likely manifest at that stage also. So we'll have less taste for bhakti, and the possibility of anarthas and materialistic tendencies coming in is more. So therefore we become more, let's say, fragile or unsteady in our bhakti. And then we can stop, or we can get involved in all sorts of material activities, etc. So it's not a very good position to be in. If they're on a high level, of course, then it goes a little bit, then they still have that propensity to see what the problem is and, immediately rectify it.
So I've heard that if somebody utters a curse, but they don't have the
Shakti
to influence that curse. I have heard that it comes back on that
Oh, I see.
person. Have you heard?
Oh, I don't know about that, but maybe it's so. In any case, in devotees generally, we don't want to curse people. We're well-wishers of people. We don't like to curse them.
Because when you talk about giving somebody's blessings, like the basic sort of blessing is sort of sending good thoughts to people.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing the opposite, you're sending bad thoughts to people, is that actually influencing?
It can. Well, it's just like asat sangha. We have devotee here, and we have asat for materialist here. So, and if it's a very, let's say, very sinful person or got bad qualities, etc., even the proximity is going to have some effect. Now, it's not considered so serious as when we start associating in a friendly way. That's when we start identifying with that person and we start picking up all of his qualities. Real, transfer of whatever is very easy then when there's equal level. We keep our distance, then it's less likely. But let's, from the point of view of auras, let's say you've got your subtle body here, subtle body here. So subtle bodies they interact with each other. And your subtle body is always changing according to your thoughts and whatever like that. And your environment also affects your subtle body like that. So we've got a person here with all the dark subtle body with all the darkness in it like that. So it can start affecting you also if you're not careful. It won't be a permanent effect, but the closer you get, then you go away. So that's why in what does Lord Chaitanya say when you see the Mayavadi coming? Jump in the Ganga. Because just getting near is contaminating, so you wash it off with Ganga water, all that bad influence on you, and protect yourself like that. Even in, of course, when the child is born, technically they shouldn't come out of the house for a month. They stay in the house. And the reason for that is people from outside, they don't want all the other people and all their bad vibrations on that child, getting stuck on that child like this. So they try to protect the child in this way. And of course the child also, his subtle body is very, very tender at that point. So try to keep him away from everybody. And we see that in South India, the Shankaracharya, when he's like 12 years old or something, they start educating him, or maybe 6 years old, and they pick one as the next Shankaracharya, whatever. So they don't let him see anybody for many years. Outside people cannot see him. And if they do, it's at a very great distance. And if he goes walking on the street, he can't go alone. He has to be surrounded by all these other people. So nobody can get near him like this. They don't want bad influence on him at all. And, even this physical proximity like that. So there is some, effect of physical proximity also. The same goes for good association. Simply being an association of a great devotee, simply by sitting next to him, you can also pick up some influence that way. Or we take the foot water, the foot dust, or whatever, Mahaprasadam, that's also Mahamaprasadam, then that's also an influence.
So many devotees would report that when they were in the room with Prabhupada, it seems like it was just spiritually surcharged.
Yeah.
Like whether it was his aura or spiritual Shakti, somehow or other it was influenced.
Yeah, it can spread.
But Maharaj, you were just commenting about how thoughts can affect the subtle body.
Yeah.
And I've had the experience that sometimes what happens is like, negative things are happening to you, like, things break or diseases of the body, whatever. And you're able to sort of push through. But then sometimes what starts happening, I find, at least in myself, I start to contemplate these things.
Come back again.
And then it starts to kind of affect my overall consciousness. Is that the subtle body kind of having an effect on us? I mean, what's the mechanism?
Oh, well, yeah. The subtle body and the gross body are very closely connected to each other. So that's why even in modern medicine they say that most of the diseases are caused by your mind. If you have stress, if you have worries, you're more likely to get sick. So that's just where medical professionals say that, But we understand that that's so, that all the sickness is ultimately in your mind. That your negative thoughts will produce the problems in the body. So it may be anger, maybe fear, maybe lamentation or whatever. But that's all in your mental body, your subtle body. But that will eventually, if it's prominent, it'll start affecting your physical body and certain organs of your body, and then you start getting physical sickness because of that. So that there is a direct relationship there between mind and body.
For the class, I was wondering, in the Shastra also states that we should discriminate, but even in that, from your whole class, it seems like there's a big pitfall just even in discriminating, because you're still observing something that someone's doing, so you want to also not be disturbed or affected by that, so some negative vibration may be, or how do you discriminate at the same time you give out good thoughts but you keep a distance?
Yeah, well, even in Nectar of Instruction, there's different levels of devotees, so you associate with them in different ways. That means you have to discriminate. This is that type of devotee, this is this one, this is this one. So some devotees are called the Prakata Vaishnava, the lower section, that they may chant Hare Krishna once in a while or whatever, we don't know, or the Sahajiyas or whatever, they chant Hare Krishna also, and some different people doing different things, a little bhakti or whatever. Well, we mentally respect, but we don't get too close. Yeah? Then we got the serious Vaishnava, those who have taken vows, those are up to some standard. So that's the Dikshita Vaishnava, the one who's serious. He's taken vows, he's taken guru, he's following rules and regulations, no scripture. Those, we give respect, actual respect to them. And then those who are higher, who are really fixed on them, and then we start serving those. So that's the conduct of the Madhyama Vaishnava. He's able to distinguish and also serve in different ways according to the level of the person. At the same time, he doesn't commit aparads. So that way of distinguishing between the Vaishnavas is not part of aparad. The aparad is when we unnecessarily look for faults and start criticizing and things like that. That's when we end up with problems. So generally, the Madhyamadikari will not look for the faults. So therefore, he won't be critical of people. He's not criticizing and saying, this is wrong with this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. He's looking for the devotees and trying to associate with devotees at different levels. The Madhyamas and those who are higher. Okay. One question?
Maharaj, how do you see others' criticism of ourselves?
Oh, well, the devotee in one sense is very humble. So he says everything is true and I'm the lowest of the lowest, so therefore any criticism is valuable for me. Of course, at the same time there may be people who are criticizing for the wrong reasons or whatever. But the devotee is very tolerant, so our instruction is more tolerant than a tree and humbler than a blade of grass. So we simply accept all of that and in a very, very tolerant way. And let Krishna take care of it, whatever has to be done. Okay. Hare Krishna.